Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm going to show you how I created this makeup vanity table. So let's go. So the first thing I did to create this table was to actually draw a 3D model of it, and that way I could actually see that the joint and the swivel on the two pieces of the table would actually work, so that Josephine would be able to have the camera set up so she could do her videos, but also if she was going to do someone else's makeup, she could move the table back to flush, and that way it would give her more room. So the first thing I did was purchase the actual bench top. Now I went down to my local hardware store and I purchased this bench top, which I was lucky enough to get a second-hand or return stock. That way it became quite cheap. The only difference is that it didn't have any edging on the side, so I had to actually buy edging separate, but the price worked out to be about a third of what it would have cost if I'd purchased the bench as brand new. There was a downside to this, which you'll see later on, in that the edging I'd never done before, so my first time it wasn't perfect, but it was still worked out fine anyway, and considering the cost saving, I was actually quite happy. So now that I had the bench top, I actually cut it with a circular saw and cut it into two separate pieces. Now one was 1 meter and the other was about 1.6. Now the measurements would be dependent on the room size that you're using. So if you've got a smaller wall, you would make it smaller or longer if you had a bigger room. The thing that I wanted to do was put the first piece in and actually install the legs. So first I line the legs up in each of the corners, drill a pilot hole which makes the screw go in easier, and use the cordless drill to install the screws. Do this across all four legs and make sure the legs are spaced out evenly so that you actually distribute the weight that you're putting on the table so that the table doesn't tip over or become unbalanced. So I'm unscrewing the legs on. So I'm unscrewing the caps on the legs. That brings it up about 30 mil, which depending on where you actually want the height of your table, you can adjust to suit. We're just slotting in a set of drawers here in the corner. Now you can use whatever you want, or you can just leave it blank, it's up to you. Now we're going to do the same thing with the other piece of the table, put two legs. We're only going to do one side, but do the exact same thing, screwing the pilot holes and then the screws. Now I'm adding on a set of caster wheels on the top of these legs. So how I'm going to do that is use liquid nails on the top of it, and then I'm going to screw it down, as you can see here. I line the tables on top of each other, and then I'm masking out where roughly the end will go, making sure that I can swivel it out and that it's not going to hit anything on the way, and that way I can find the exact point on where that pivot is going to be in the corner of that top table. So on that top table I'm going to install some masking tape or some painter's tape because it comes off nice and easy. Now I'm going to find the point on which that pivot is going to be from, and that's so that we can put these furniture studs in. So basically it's a screw on one end and a thread on the other. So on the bottom table I'm going to mark out where that pivot point is as well, and we're going to drill a hole all the way through. So do the pilot hole to begin with, and then what we're going to do is use a drill bit that's the same size as the thread and go all the way through the table. Now by putting the tape down on the table, if you go through too fast and the drill bit comes down and hits the table, you've protected it as well, so it's not going to get scratched as much. Now on the bottom we're going to hold that piece down by using these nylon lock nuts. Now to actually screw them up we need to put a wider hole on the bottom, so I'm just using this spade bit to actually open up that hole at the bottom of the table, and that way you can actually get the nut through and actually screw it up. So you don't want to go all the way up through, just enough so you can get the nut on the back. Now on the other table we're doing the same thing with a pilot hole. Now make sure you don't go all the way through. Now we're going to get the thread side of that furniture stud, and we're going to start screwing that into that pilot hole. Now you just slowly work it through. Now because of the nut is actually going to go down first, so just get it all the way to the bottom and then you can start turning and you'll start to thread through the wood and actually screw that down into the wood. And you want to get it down deep enough that it's actually got a good grip. Make sure you keep it straight as you're going down. You don't want it to be off-centered because it won't line up with the table properly when you go to join the two pieces. So now we're going to do the edging. Now the edging actually is an extra strip that you cut to the actual length that you want. So you can just do a little bit extra as well. Now you just trim that with some scissors, or be careful with a Stanley knife or a box cutter. Once you've got the right length, you want to add some of the adhesive glue onto both the table and also the strip. Now you do want to set them aside and just leave them both for about 10 to 15 minutes or until they get a bit tacky. Once they get tacky, you can actually just apply the two of them together. Make sure you're applying some pressure, and then it'll dry over 24 hours. This was the first time that I'd done this, so I learned after the first time that I needed to have something weighing on it or actually pulling it together to get that really close grip together. So I'd advise that if you're going to do it, have something sitting on top of it or clamps to hold it together to actually keep those together. It's not always necessary, but just to make sure that it's flush, it's probably a good idea. Now there'll be an excess on the bottom if you've lined it up, and what you do is actually run along. You can either use a box cutter or Stanley knife as I'm doing here, and I'm just slowly trimming back and getting it as close to the table as possible. Now you just take this step at a time, just a little bit at a time, and you just slowly trim it back to a flush amount. Now you can also use a router and actually cut it, but I kind of didn't want to go to that extreme on this. Now it was my first time doing it, so it was a bit rough to start off, but eventually I got the hang of it. Now, as you can see, you get it as flush as possible. Now, if you lined it up properly, or if you lined it up in a way that you only need to trim the bottom side, it's a little easier to do. You only have to do one side, and it's a bit less noticeable if you do make any mistakes. I've put down some more tape along that edging. And so what I'm going to do now is get some sandpaper. Now I've got a couple different types or different grit levels. Now there's one that's a 600 there and one that's a 1200. So I'm going to start off with the more coarse one being the 600, and I can run along and actually try and sand that down to being as flush as possible. Now if you're doing this on the top, just be careful not to sand the actual laminate that you want to see later on. Now once I've done the 600 for a bit and got it a bit flush, I then use the 1200 to then just smooth it out and make it as smooth as possible. And just remember, you can keep going and trying again. If it's not smooth enough, just come back and redo it again, and eventually you'll get it down to a nice smooth finish that you're happy with. So as this is my first time doing this, you can tell that the circular saw actually chipped away some of the table, and that also that edging wasn't really as flush as I'd like to on some of it. So what I'm going to do now is fill in all those gaps. So what I'm going to use is this white spack filler, which I'm just going to force into those gaps and just run it along the edging, and basically it's just going to set hard, and then I'm going to sand it back a little bit or use an edge of a blade or anything that's sharp to kind of grind it back. Now I can keep coming back and doing it, so if I feel like I've taken too much off when I'm sanding it out, all I need to do is just come back and reapply more, and you can do that until it's nice and flush. Once I've done that, I'm just going to use this paint, which I used a gloss white, and in hindsight I probably could have used something that matched the table a little better, but the color will wear down over time with some wear and tear. And I'm just scraping off any of the excess paint which doesn't fit into those gaps. And just like the spack filler, if I take too much off, I can always come back, apply a little bit more, let it dry, and then scrape it off again. And just keep on doing this until you're happy with the result. Now we just need to join the two pieces together. So I've got that bolt running through that hole there, and on the underside of it we're just going to attach the nylon lock nut, And I'm just going to do it up until it's actually a bit tight. Now I don't want to overdo it and actually clamp it down because I still want the table to be able to freely move, but I don't want it to be able to lift off when it's not required. So now the table's done. All we need to do now is add in any other extra parts that we want to the table. And in this case, I'm actually going to install a mirror. So I'm putting in the screw plugs into the wall. Now I need to make sure that the mirror is high enough that when you swivel that table back in, that it doesn't hit the mirror. And I'm also using these 20 kilo screw plugs that go into the plaster. Now I can also attach other adhesive type of brackets onto the wall if I need to. So I'm just going to install it to begin with and then reassess it and how much weight the mirror actually is. So there you have it, the custom vanity benchtop. Now, if you like the video, hit the like button, go subscribe, go check out Josephine's channel so you can see her do those makeup tutorials with this new table. That's about it from me. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.